I haven't reviewed too many games for the N64, and mostly that's because I didn't play it a whole lot growing up. I either played games on the PC or on the PS1, so I was looking for a beat 'em up game on the N64. And there aren't very many of them. I think I only came across two that are classified as beat 'em ups. So let's take a look at the first one, and that is Fighting Force. So the story's okay. There's an evil scientist who's going to do something to end the world or some such nonsense like that. It's a standard plot that reflects, some of the popular conspiracy theories about the world ending in the year 2000. This was a pretty common thing. If you grew up in the 90s, you ran into a whole bunch of different video games who centered their plot around the world ending on January 1st, 2000, or ending in the year 2000. There's a TV show about it. There was so much other bullshit about it as well. There was the whole Y2K conspiracy theory, or just made up nonsense. Yeah, no one really knew what was going to happen, and it turned out nothing did happen, so yeah. Anyway, we have Dr. Zhang. He's our big bad guy, and you spend the game chasing him around the city. This isn't too different from other beat-em-ups, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a pretty familiar concept, and yeah, it's done fairly well here. The manual outlines the story, and we learn that the game is taking place after 2000. So the world didn't end, and since Dr. Zhang had convinced himself that the world was going to end in 2000, he decided to just do it himself, because he's kind of a dickhead. For some reason, I kind of like this idea. It's pretty great, at least I think it is. He isn't trying to take over the world, he's trying to end it. For some reason, that seems a little bit fresher than the normal bad guy who wants to actually take over the world and do whatever with it. They never get that far, so you never really find out what they want to do. I really wasn't expecting too much from the game's story, and most people don't play beat-em-ups for their story. I would say that Fighting Force kind of over-delivered on its plot, which is admirable. It kind of makes it a little different and makes it stand out, even if you are essentially doing the same thing of wandering around beating the crap out of a bunch of people who are probably bad guys. At least the game kind of says that they're in a cult, so I'll believe it. It's better than some of the others where you just walk down a street and we're assuming all the people on the street aren't just defending themselves, they're trying to hurt you. Anyway, let's get into the gameplay a little bit. This is a 3D beat-em-up, which is done pretty well. I'd say the gameplay is fairly solid. You punch and you kick your enemies throughout the game. There's a lot of weapons that you can pick up. The only thing I don't really like is how slow your character moves in this. It just feels like you're moving through molasses. I really did not like that part. The locations in Fighting Force are pretty big. But you need to walk like so painfully slow. That really is the only issue I have with this game, is how slow this guy's walking. Like, you would expect some urgency behind it, but he just sort of lollygags around. If there was a run button in this, I did not see it. Even when I looked at the manual, I did not see a run button at all. It just makes it very strange that your character doesn't really seem too concerned with what's happening. So the controls are pretty simple. You just have your punch, your kick, your back attack, and then you have a grab button. This is when I went back to look in the manual to see if I was missing something, like maybe there is a run or a dash button or a way to dash, and I just didn't see it. There isn't a run button, a jump button, and I didn't see a block button in there either, so yeah, that was interesting. I could have just read it wrong, which is possible, but I just didn't see it in there. While it is nice that I wasn't missing anything, it was a little disappointing because there's so many unused buttons that could have been used to do a lot of other things in this, or at least get you to moving along faster. Tracking your enemies can be a little tricky because there isn't a button to control the camera aside from just zooming in and out. There isn't a button to lock onto your enemies, so that's kind of annoying. It's a little crap, but it's not the worst thing in the world because you don't fight a lot of opponents at once. It really only gets to be problematic when you've got a gun and you're trying to aim, and it just doesn't always work out too well. Or if you're fighting a group of enemies and they kind of gang up on you, that can be a little problematic, but it isn't anything that you can't overcome. I do like Dynamite Cop more than this. I think that gameplay is a little bit better, specifically because they stick to more of a simple arcade style where you're only on one screen and it locks. Here, you're moving throughout the stage, which matches up with what you would do with some of the other beat-em-ups, but it's rather annoying because your movement's slow again. So I'll stop beating on that, just because. This is a fun beat-em-up, though. It's by no means my favorite in the genre, but it is a fun game. It would have been nice if there had been like a special attack, but I think the developers assumed that all the weapons were making up for that, and there is some merit to that, so the weapons are kind of fun to use. It took me a little while to figure out how to throw them, though. That was kind of funny, because I'm sitting there holding an empty gun, and like I just wasn't going to throw it. And there is a lot of destructible stuff in the stages, so that's pretty cool as well. Overall, I think the gameplay is pretty good once you get used to it. And this game does enough to make you want to keep playing, so that's always a good thing. Fighting Force looks decent for the time. It's pretty much what I was expecting from an N64 game. The levels look pretty good. They're very big and maybe a bit too big for the time, just because of your character's movement. I'm sorry, I can't. I'll stop with that already. But yeah, they might be a little bit too big for the time. They are well detailed. They look great. I like the fact that there's a lot of destructible stuff in it. It looks pretty good. Not amazing, but it doesn't look terrible. Even the character sprites look all right. You can pretty much tell what you're fighting. That's always a good thing, because there are some games where you just look at the screen and wonder, what the hell is that? And why should I try to kill it? That's always a problem when you run into something like that. One thing that is really cool about this is how the enemies are like running at you, how they run onto the screen and you can see where they're coming from. It's a little thing, but it's really cool. At least I really enjoy it. It is a little hard to see the weapons at times. It isn't a huge issue, but sometimes there's just crap on the screen, or something might be laying on top of it and you don't really see it. It wasn't always an issue, but it's occasionally popped up. I have no idea what the health items are supposed to be. I really have no idea what they are. I'm assuming they're med kits, but they really don't always look like it. Sometimes they look like a gold bar laying on the ground. It's weird, but hey, they're keeping my character alive, so I'm not really going to question that too much. The explosions and cutscenes look decent. They're all using in-game graphics, which isn't a problem. They look perfectly fine for what they are. It's just a decent looking game without a whole lot of things to complain about. I do want to say that the cutscenes in Dynamite Cop look better than this, but these aren't bad by any stretch of the means. The camera is kind of... how can I put this? It's not the worst thing in the world, but it isn't, Super Mario 64, where it's pretty spot on. The camera gets the job done. It doesn't screw you over, so that's always a good thing. It's just another average thing in this game where I could point out some faults with it, but there really isn't too much to complain about. Overall, I like the graphics. They aren't amazing, but they're definitely not terrible. It feels like an average looking N64 game from the late 1990s. And that's not a bad thing. It's, perfectly fine. Fighting Force on the N64 has good graphics and solid gameplay that compensate for some of the game's shortcomings. There's nothing seriously wrong with this, it's just a lot of little things that are more annoying than anything else. It's a pretty great beat 'em up. Not the best that I've ever played, but definitely not the worst. The controls are good, and it's got a fun story. Again, just minor issues, nothing that's a major problem with it. I had fun with this game. It is a somewhat basic beat 'em up, but that's not really a bad thing. My biggest issues were just the lack of super attacks, some of the control issues where you don't have a run button, you don't have a jump, and you don't have a block button. Or at least ones that I couldn't find, so I could be wrong on that. I am going to look at the PS1 version and then also the sequel that's on the PS1 at some point. I do like Dynamite Cop more than this, and I also like King of Dragons and Knights of the Round better than this as well. That still doesn't mean you shouldn't try this one out, it just means it's not going to be as good as some of the other games. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.